In today's video we're going to paint the Noxious Blightbringers. The first step is the obvious black undercoat because I want to try and keep these miniatures fairly dark. And the next part I've chose to start with is a little bit on the messy side. So I want to cover all the areas where I want the rust, and I've started off with Rhinox hide first. And then, as you can see, I'm using an old brush where the bristles are spread out, and I'm using this to apply riser rust. And you just have to dab it in, and it gives you these two tones there between the darker and lighter parts of the rust. For the main colour for the armour, I've started off with Death Guard Green first, and this will help to tidy up any of the areas where you've ended up applying the orange where you didn't want it, to clean all that up, hence why I did the rust parts first. For the highlights on the armour, I've used Nurgling Green, and I only need one coat for the highlights. However, I've also used this green for the flesh areas, in which I've applied 2 coats of the Nurgling Green to give it a good base coat. Now, to add some depth into the armoured areas, I've thinned down some Agrax Earthshade with some Lamia Medium, and this helps it to want to sink into the recessed areas, and it gives it a bit of depth. But because I'm using Agrax Earthshade as opposed to a green colour, it also helps to give it a slightly more dirtier look to the armour. Now we're going to leave the armour alone for a while and do a little bit of work on the skin areas, of which I've used a mix of Nurgling Green and Upshapti Bone to give the flesh areas a little bit of a highlight. For the white parts here, first off I started with Corax White, and again you'll want a couple of coats just to make sure you've got a good base coat. And then I've applied a small amount of white scar just to catch out the uppermost areas to bring a bit more life to the cloth parts of the miniature. Now for the cloth he's got here, I wanted to make it look dirty and filthy, so I started off initially using a old brush, the same as what I did with the rust earlier, and I applied some Talon Sand and some Bloat Brown, and just dabbing it in a few places just to make it look like filth was splattered up onto the cloth. And then when that was dry, I thinned down some Mechanicus Standard Grey with some water, and this is applied only across the bottom, and this helps to show how the cloth looks dulled down and dirty from it being dragged around in the water. For the brass areas, we started with Gehenna's Gold first, and again it's quite possible you might need to apply more than one coat, and I wanted these again to have a nice rustic look rather than having a nice shiny gold to them, so I applied a green weathering powder to the area, and the weathering powder had some Lamia Medium added to it first, and this way it basically turns it into a paint, but when it's dry it will give it quite a dull look rather than a shiny glossy look of paint, and I think this gives it an end result that looks quite impressive. For the areas where we've got the horns, again I want these miniatures to look quite dark, so I've used Mechanicus Standard Grey initially for the horns, and I've then used Nurgling Green just to pick out the sharper parts of the horns, and this helps to add a bit of colour to the horns, but it also helps to tie in the horns somewhat into the greens of the rest of the miniature. However, if you prefer a more brown looking type of horn, I've got a video that covers that, so you can always look at that video. For his plasma pistol, I chose to not make it rusty, but I still wanted to keep it quite dark. So the main housing is Chaos Black initially, and then Mechanicus Standard Grey was applied. This helps to not only give it a little bit of a highlight but keep it dark, but also It's a colour you've previously used in the miniature, both on the horns and also on the very bottom of the cloth. So it helps to tie all the different parts of the miniature in together and keep some level of similarity in the colours. Next, for the cells of the plasma pistol, I initially started off with several coats of Hoff blue until I had a good base coat. And once the blue was dry, I used a 50-50 mix of Carroburg Crimson and Lamia Medium. When it was dry, I made the same mix again and applied it a second time. And after that, a gloss varnish was added over to the area where you got the cells to give it a little bit of a shine. For the depots on the armour, a rust weathering powder had some Lamia Medium applied and it was put into these areas. And later on, a little bit of Agrax Earthshade was also put onto the armour to show areas where water is dripping down the armour, and as it's dripping down the armour, it's also picking up those bits of rust and leaving these streak marks. If you like the video, remember to subscribe, click the notification bell, and also share the video with your friends.